And by doing this, right, we are no longer pushing people to turn their direction. We're allowing them to grow into the change that we want them to undertake, which means that the organization itself will change only as fast as it's possible for it to change. But it will be self-regulating. And so as we look at the differences here, and this really is the difference, we want to take a distributed approach and a collaborative approach rather than a let's push change on the organization type of approach. Now, in order to do this, in order to make it possible, we've identified 7 cognitive layers. Now, 7 cognitive layers they're not very complicated, right? What they are simply is a label for certain groups of behavior that you can observe. And I'm going to go through these real quickly. The lowest one, I'll explain the whole above the line, below the line thing in just a minute, right? And we'll talk about what that means. These 7 cognitive layers, oh, by the way, the big white bar, that's called the line. And we'll talk about the line quite a bit. Starting at the bottom at B, right? People who are experiencing the B cognitive layer, you can't talk to them, frankly, right? You know, we could all form thoughts before we learned how to speak, right? I'm hungry, I want to play with this, I want to go get this, that kind of thing. That's called nonverbal cognition in our approach. And nonverbal cognition always works, right? And then we have verbal cognition, which is where we learn to use language, that sort of thing, and express, you know, desires and wants and needs and ideas and all that. Someone who is at B, right? Verbal cognition has turned off. This is someone who is incredibly stressed out, someone who's under a lot of pressure, someone who is very worried about almost everything. And when they are introduced to a change, their response is almost entirely emotional and usually not pleasant. Right? The thing they feel is any change in their environment creates a devastating loss of control. They're so worried about things in the future that they will attack that change with every single resource they have. They will spend everything they have to stop that change from coming in. You may have seen this sometimes. Right? You talk to them till you're blue in the face, and unfortunately, they just don't seem to get it. Well, they don't get it because their actual verbal cognition is not working. They can't connect the words that you're saying to the problem that they're facing or the difficulties they feel. At ACT, what we find is this is someone who will repeat the same behavior over and over and over again, looking for a different result. Right? Verbal cognition is working. You can talk to someone at ACT, and you can express ideas for change and what have you, but you're going to see them go through the same set of behaviors. Okay? You may have seen this, right? Oh, we're 3 weeks into the project. It's time for so-and-so to come running in the door screaming that everything's going to fail. Right? And you know, you can almost predict, oh, this is what's going to happen in this meeting. I don't want to go to this meeting. So that person, they're going to lose it. I just know it. That always happens right here in this project. Okay, that's someone who's at ACT. That's someone who's repeating a set of behaviors, trying to find the one that works. And sorry, it really does, right? And it's really inefficient. It's wasteful of their resources as well. Now, someone who's at think, imagination starts to work, we find at this level. However, they really can only see bad things. You may have seen this, right? This isn't going to work because that might go wrong, or this might go wrong, or this might go wrong. And so, and if you try to answer those questions, then you go, well, but what about this, and what about this, and what about this, right? Worry just seems to spread from one thing to another, and you're like, how do these things relate to each other? Right? But that's someone who's at think. Imagination is working, but they can imagine a future in which some behavior doesn't work. What they're trying to do is only take action that has a 100% certain chance of success. Anybody ever said, well, how do I know it's going to work? And if you've ever heard that, you've heard someone who is at think. How can you tell me it's going to work? How can you prove it? That's that level of control, that level of reassurance that they need in order to make that happen. Now, I want to talk about the line. I want to talk about below the line for just a moment. When we say someone is below the line, they're spending excess resource to solve their problems. They're throwing too much resource at it, right? They're focused too much on maintaining control in order to keep things together, in order to have a sense that the future is going to be okay. And as a result, every change pushes them further down. We have a calliope. Cool. Stop. Okay. So every change would begin to push them further down the scale. Right? Because they're losing resource. And we'll talk about the connection here to this in just a minute. But someone who's below the line is going to continue to stay below the line until someone or something comes in and effects a change that begins to push them back above the line. Okay, so that's what the line is. Now, one of the things about being above the line is where every layer below the line pushes you down towards the next lower level in a very damaging negative feedback loop. Every level above the line, we find people become 80% more productive. They are 5 times better at solving problems, and they use 80% less resource to solve that problem. And so when you get to generalize, the difference between think and generalize is an 80% savings in effort. You're 5 times better at solving problems. Go to plan, And you're even better. Go to innovate, go to invent, you're that much better. So someone who's at generalized, memory is working here, that's the big thing. Memory begins to work, and they can begin to apply past lessons to current problems. That's the definition of that layer. When you talk to someone and say, oh, we did something like that in the past, let me see if I've got that here somewhere. Memory will work, they'll recall it, and by reusing that, they get the benefit, the savings of reuse, roughly 80%. Someone who's at plan is using past experience to solve problems they haven't hit yet. They're looking at what could go wrong. Imagination is now working, but it's working in concert with memory. And say, oh, this might go wrong. Oh, we've got a solution for that. We did that before. Let's go put that in our project plan. Let's go ahead and get ready to do that so we don't have to worry about it. And so that's a quick definition of someone at plan. At innovate, there's another big change here. Yes, they're another 80% more efficient, but now they're changing the environment rather than changing themselves. They're rearranging the parts of their environment so it works together better, so they've offloaded the work that they want to get done. And the environment itself is helping them. And then finally at invent, they're creating the ideal environment in which to be the most effective. Right? If you do the math, someone at invent is about roughly 1,000 times more effective than someone who's at think. Because of that, because they can offload that work, create that ideal environment, and make that work for them. So that's what we call being above the line. And the additional resource that you get, the additional feeling that, hey, I can really get a lot done, starts to push you up to the next higher level, things like that. Now, I'm going to be honest, right? Very few people actually ever get to invent. And if they get there, they may not stay there very long. Life has a lot of pressure. And things can drive you back down again. Very few organizations get there, but any organization that does will dominate in its market. Right? Their ability to innovate, their ability to respond, their ability to be agile, things like that. Change for that organization is not a problem. Right? One of the other things we find is that being above the line decreases the number of repetitions you have to have in order to get someone to accept change. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what we want to do is get people above the line. By getting them above the line, we're going to find it more easy to affect the change. We'll need less effort to do that, and we'll have them more on board. We'll speed up the assimilation process. The way that we manipulate somebody, I should say motivate someone's cognitive layer. The way that we motivate that cognitive layer is a concept that we have called the confidence horizon. And simply stated, the confidence horizon is the amount of time that someone believes they'll be okay given their current level of resources, their current level of risk, and current time pressure. So for some people, it's 2 weeks. For others, it's 2 years, things like that. Now, confidence horizon rises and falls depending on changes in environment and all that stuff's going on. Anybody been on a project with a deadline? All right. So you may have noticed that during the course of development, there are always little glitches, you know, the network's not working right, the server loses a file, you know, that kind of thing. But when you're down to the last 2 weeks of deadline, somebody on the team starts to think, do you think they did that on purpose? Right? It starts to feel like, wow, everything's working against us and all that. Well, that's when confidence horizon has dropped so low that you're at B. And as it continues to stay low, paranoia begins to creep in. Right? We actually see that happen. And so that little comment that, well, God, it's like they're out to get us sort of comments, that's when you know you're close to the deadline on a project. All right? So anytime we go to affect change, we say, are you on deadline? You know, we just want to know. You know? Now, confidence horizon, resources divided by risk times time pressure. Right? As confidence horizon increases, cognitive layer will increase. Now, the funny thing about humans is we can't simply throw a resource at it. That doesn't work. We have to actually manipulate those values together, or the human brain won't believe it. It's too good, it's not going to last, those sort of things. So we try to work this so that people get to that generalized layer, because when we get them to generalize, it only takes 2 to 3 repetitions instead of 64.